Bal Gangadhar Tilak, respected of the people, 1856 to 1920. The period covered by the last decade of the 19th and the first decade of the 20th century was marked in India by the growth of agitation in every sphere of life against the British rule and domination. Through the medium of the Indian owned press, of the Indian National Congress, of the speeches and actions of Indians who visited or lived in England, of English people themselves like Charles Bradlaugh and later Mrs. Besant and C.F. Andrews, and more reprehensibly of the activities of terrorists in Bengal and the Bombay Presidency. The claims of Indians first to be associated on terms of equality in the government of their country, later to be granted Home Rule and a status equal to the self-governing portions of the British Empire, were ceaselessly and forcefully advanced. The force of this agitation took the government of India, and many Indians as well, completely by surprise. It owed its it owed its origin and sustained continuance more than to any other single factor to the personality of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Before, however, the influence and the career of this remarkable man are discussed, it is necessary to get clear the background of past history against which he worked and which throughout his life so profoundly affected his thoughts. The crushing of the Indian Mutiny had led to a complete cessation of overt agitation against or dissatisfaction with British rule. Outwardly, the years after 1858 were ones of internal peace. From open rebellion, the British had nothing to fear. The mutiny had, however, left a feeling of bitterness in many Indian minds, which neither time nor the British did much to dispel. The latter gave to Indians an efficient but impersonal administrative system, but only intermittent prosperity, a large measure of justice, but only in rare cases any real understanding. Above all, remembering always the mutiny, they tended to treat Indians not only as their inferiors, but also as people who could not be trusted. It was not surprising that resentment persisted in the minds of educated Indians. But whereas in the pre mutiny era, the heyday of the Brahmo Samaj, the educated classes had been at one in embracing Western ideals. After 1858, they split into two camps, of which one maintained that though Western education should be utilized to the full, yet all that was best in thought and action was contained in the tenets of Orthodox Hinduism. This point of view was typified by the Arya Samaj and the Back to Vedas movement. Its upholders execrated the foreigners, displayed a harsh intolerance towards everything that was not Hindu. Preeminent among them, at least during the early years of his prominence, was Tilak. though it is one of his main claims to greatness that he moved finally a considerable distance from this attitude. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was born at Ratnagiri on the Konkan coast in 1856. He was by birth a Brahmin, which was to be an important factor in his life, and the sect to which he belonged was the Chitpavan, which was the predominant influence controlling his early activities. The Chitpavan Brahmins had been in the 18th and early part of the 19th centuries de facto rulers of the Maratha kingdom, which had its capital at Pune, and the resistance of the Marathas to the English power had been at once more skillfully conducted, more stubborn, and more prolonged than that of any other Indian kingdom, Hindu or Muslim, towards their alien English rulers, who had deprived them of their power and preeminence. Many of them felt an animosity more bitter, sustained, and purposeful than was to be found anywhere else in India. Tilak was brought up in the strictly orthodox Brahmin tradition. As a Chitpavan, he had behind him a tradition of politics and public service. As a Maratha, he was told the stories of the glorious days of Shivaji and the Maratha Empire, the days when the foreigners, in this case the Muslims, were driven in ignominy from Maharashtra. He went as a young man to Pune, the center of Maratha irraditism, where as soon after the mutiny as 1862, an abortive conspiracy had sought to re-establish the power of the Peshwas. There he was appointed professor of mathematics in the New English School, and there after a while he became the founder and proprietor of two journals, the Maratha printed in English and the Kesari, the latter which was the first one printed in a vernacular Marathi to gain any noticeable circulation among educated Indians, was destined to gain fame throughout the peninsula. Hitherto education and day-to-day information had been assimilated through the medium of the English tongue. Tilak's earliest ideal, to which he gave practical expression by helping to found national schools independent of government control, which however were later suppressed, was that English should take second place too, if not altogether be supplanted by, the vernacular in the sphere of education as well as of the press. When Tilak was 29 years old, the first session of the Indian National Congress was being held in Bombay, presided over by an Englishman, Allen Hume, regarded with benevolence as something harmless by the Viceroy. Lord Dufferin, it was mildly liberal in tone and nowhere expressed hostility to the British connection. Tilak was not present at this first meeting, though he had already made his mark in the Bombay presidency. Violent in speech and print, he had already in the Pune Sarvajanak Sabha and the Education Committee, of which he and Ranade were the leading lights, proved himself the intolerant champion of Hinduism, often in a reactionary form. He was, however, a delegate to the fifth session of the Congress at Bombay in 1889. His speeches in this and succeeding sessions, particularly his demand that the attitude of mendicancy, the habit of begging favors from the British, should be abandoned, did much to drive Congress into opposition to the established government. His famous cry, "Freedom is my birthright and I will have it," awoke an emotional echo throughout India. His attitude, however, aroused misgivings among many of the moderates. Ranade and later even Gokhale and Surendranath Banerjee not only viewed with alarm the violence of his language, but also began to suspect that he spoke and acted first as a Brahmin, second as a Maratha, and only incidentally as a man with a vision of a united India of the future. It must be admitted that his actions during the closing years of the 19th century did much to justify these suspicions. In 1890, the Government of India introduced the Age of Consent Bill, forbidding the consummation of a marriage before the wife was 12 years old. Its provisions commanded assent from all those who clung to the ideals of the Brahmo Samaj. But Tilak, the orthodox Brahmin, violently opposed it. His attitude won him praise from strictly orthodox Hindus, who abounded in Maharashtra, and from all those who welcomed any gesture of defiance to the British. Through the columns of the Kesari, which was to attain the then altogether remarkable circulation of 20,000 copies, he could already address a large public, and his personality, as well as the note of challenge and defiance in his writings and speeches, brought him an immense and unquestioning following. Outstanding in intellect, subtle as well as forceful in argument, he could rouse in those with whom he came into contact the same violent emotions, whether of enthusiasm or hatred, which he himself felt. On any given issue, he was passionately sincere, and he had the gift that was to be later preeminently Gandhi's of inspiring unquestioning devotion. He was given, by common consent, the name of Lokamanya, respected by the people. Tilak, in these early years, bent all his efforts to reawake in the Maratha people a sense of their past greatness, with a view to future independence. He went among the poor villagers of the Deccan, as well as the townspeople of Pune, urging the revival of celebrations in connections with Ganpati, the elephant headed god known to every village in India. And in 1893, he organized in Pune the first public festival in the god's honor. He founded Ganpati societies, banded the students in the towns and the youths in the villages into melas and gymnastic societies, giving to them a corporate feeling and a sense of their own importance, while he urged them in the columns of the Kesari to deeds of self denial and valor, and by implication violence, in defense of their ancient glory against the hated foreigner. In the same year, he founded the Anti Cow Killing Society, a direct challenge to Muslims, which he followed up by demanding at meetings of the Sarvajanik Sabha from the government the lifting of the ban on the playing of music by Hindu processions in front of mosque. As a result, the Muslim members of the Sabha resigned, but Tilak acquired fresh popularity as the champion of the Hindus. Further, to consolidate Maratha sentiment and activity, Tilak determined to revive the worship of the greatest of all Maratha heroes, Shivaji, the founder of the Maratha power. In 1895, he organized and presided over the first great Shivaji festival at Raigarh, Shivaji's first capital. There was recited by one of Tilak's followers a poem written specially for the occasion, the sense of which was as follows: Let us be prompt like Shivaji to engage in desperate enterprises. Take up your swords and shields, and we shall cut off countless heads of enemies. Listen, though we shall have to risk our lives in a national war, we shall assuredly shed the lifeblood of our enemies. There also Tilak himself spoke. In Shivaji's life there had been one incident, the killing with the notorious tiger's claw of Afzal Khan, the opposing general with whom he was in peace conference, which laid him open to the charge of treachery. Tilak's way of treating the incident was highly insignificant. It is needless to make further researches into the killing of Afzal Khan. Let us even assume that Shivaji deliberately planned and executed the murder. Did Shivaji commit a sin in killing Afzal Khan? The answer to this question can be found in the Mahabharata itself. The divine Krishna teaching in the Gita tells us we may kill even our teachers and our kingsmen, and no blame attaches if we are not actuated by selfish desires. God has conferred on the foreigners no grant of Hindustan, inscribed on imperishable brass. Shivaji strove to drive them forth out of the land of his birth, but he was guiltless of the sin of covetousness. Do not circumscribe your vision like frogs in a well. Rise above the penal code into the rarefied atmosphere of the sacred Bhagavad Gita and consider the action of great men. There could be no clearer incitement to violent action, no clearer indication of that policy of condoning, if not actually inspiring, assassination which he was shortly to adopt. The years 1896 and 97 were marked by an appalling famine, not only in the Deccan but throughout India. Tilak was untiring and selfless in his efforts to relieve the distress, but neither voluntary service nor the measures which the various administrations were able to put into effect prevented untold suffering and a heavy mortality rate. Widespread bitterness was felt at the inability of the British to do more, and this bitterness was increased tenfold by the first outbreak in Bombay Presidency in 1897 of bubonic plague in India. Once again, Tilak displayed great energy and unselfishness. He refused to leave Pune, where the disease was raging and whence many who could afford to had fled, and organized relief on a wide scale. He worked through the Sarvajanik Sabha, with whom the British authorities unwisely refused to cooperate, and started Hindu plague hospitals throughout the city. At the same time, he carried on a series of bitter attacks on the British in the Kesari. The measures which officials had to take to combat the plague ran counter to many Hindu religious customs. and inborn prejudices. Tilak took full advantage of this, accusing the administration not only of incompetence, but of deliberate and unnecessary interference in matters that good Hindus held sacred. Utterly sincere in his hatred of British domination, he was careless of what means he employed to achieve his end, and he inflamed the sentiments of his listeners and readers to a dangerously explosive emotional point. In June 1897, two British officials, Rand and Ayers, were assassinated in Pune by a young Chitpavan Damodar Chapekar. There is no shred of evidence that Tilak either planned the assassination or directly incited the assassination, but the deed was the inevitable consequence on an emotional youth of the tone of his articles in the Kesari. On account of these articles, he was prosecuted for sedition, convicted on a majority vote of six European jurors against three Indians, and sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. The murder of Rand and Ayers is a landmark in Indian history for two reasons. It marked the start of organized terrorism, and it resulted, owing to his subsequent conviction, in the final emergence of Tilak as a popular hero. His term of imprisonment was widely regarded as a martyrdom in the cause of Indian freedom, and on his release, he became at once the leader of the extremist party in Congress. For that position, he was eminently fitted, for no single man had done more in the previous years to awaken in Hindu Indians, educated and uneducated, the desire to govern themselves, and the feeling that they were fitted so to do. In its early days, Congress had been mainly a body of intellectuals, thinking in terms of the intellect. Tilak had been the first Indian to bring political agitation to the masses. Now, after the famine and the plague, which had affected not only Maharashtra but the whole of India, the time was ripe to direct their thoughts into anti British channels. Tilak was not the man to lose the opportunity. Between moderate congressmen like Naoroji, Gokhale, and Surendranath Banerjee and Tilak, and his two chief allies, Bipin Chandrapal and Arabindo Ghose, there was always fundamental agreement on the end to be achieved, the governing of India by Indians. That Tilak was now recognized as more than a champion of orthodox Maratha Brahmanism is proved by his close collaboration with Bipin Chandrapal, a Bengali of convinced reformist views. But upon the way of achievement, the two wings of Congress came increasingly to differ, hating violence, bearing no animosity against individual Englishmen. The moderates were opposed to terrorism in all its forms. Tilak, on the other hand, who had become secretary of the Standing Committee for the Deccan, maintained that discussion and the passing of resolutions would achieve nothing, that only by direct action could they hope to achieve their goal. And by direct action, he meant the use of the boycott weapon and the encouragement of political assassination. His ideas, which had already found acceptance in the Deccan, took root now even more effectively in Bengal, which took and in future held the lead in terrorist activities. To some extent, the government of India played into the extremists' hands. The partition of Bengal in 1905, against the clearly expressed wishes of its inhabitants, strengthened Tilak's position to the demand for Swadeshi, which he had earlier put forward to Congress. He now added a demand for the complete boycott of British goods. At the Congress meeting at Benares in 1905, the principle of the boycott was partially accepted. In 1906 at Calcutta, the President Dadabhai Naoroji, himself a moderate, spoke more firmly than ever before. We do not ask for any favors. We want only justice. The whole matter can be comprised in one word: self government or Swaraj. It was the standpoint taken up by Tilak many years before. The tone of this presidential speech, however, raised false hopes that the moderates might in the following year adopt the full boycott policy, with all that it might entail. At Surat, where Congress assembled in 1907, it became obvious at once that no such change of heart had taken place. A violent scene developed, Surendranath Banerjee being constantly interrupted by Tilak's party, and the second day Congress broke up in confusion. Not for 10 years was Tilak, or those who thought with him to attend its meetings. The split in the Congress ranks that occurred at Surat was a blow to the ideal of Indian unity. A main factor contributing to it was Tilak's own uncompromising attitude. At Surat, there was a dangerous recrudescence of the cleavage between Maharashtra and the rest of India, but neither his break with Congress nor the civil and criminal proceedings in which in the previous years he had been involved did anything to lessen his popularity. In the Thai Maharaj case, he was accused as an executor of forgery, perjury, and corruption. On the criminal proceedings, he was at first found guilty, but on appeal, the conviction was set aside. In the civil proceedings brought against him on the same issue, three trials were necessary. But again, finally, before the Privy Council sitting in London, judgment was given in his favour. In the political field, he had found a new outlet for his activities in the midlands of Bombay. Miserably housed and miserably paid, they reacted at once to his propaganda, which once again was compounded of disinterestedness. As in his efforts to curb the evils of drunkenness and hatred of the British, that he, an orthodox Brahmin, should condescend to come among the poor mill hands, should strive to better their condition, was a thing to make them wonder and then worship. And in his controversy with the moderates, it was he whom they regarded as their champion. In the meantime, he continued his control of the Kesari, which had now found many imitators throughout India, and it was again one of his articles therein that for a second time caused him to be tried. Convicted and imprisoned. In 1908, Mrs. and Miss Kennedy were killed in Bengal by a bomb thrown by a terrorist. Tilak in the Kesari applauded the latter's action, comparing it with that of Chapekar 11 years earlier, and praising both. The article was clearly intended to be an incitement to further similar deeds, and Tilak, despite a speech in his own defense that lasted for 21.5 hours, was sentenced to 6 years transportation. This was commuted to imprisonment at Mandalay. Such was Tilak's popularity that riots breaking out in Bombay after news of the sentence continued for 6 days. With his imprisonment, the most important part of his career was ended. He had already done more than any other man to raise active opposition to the British. First in Maharashtra, then in Bengal, and in lesser degree throughout the rest of India. He has been called the father of Indian unrest, and the title is an apt one. As such, he had come to enjoy immense popularity and prestige among Hindus of all castes. He had become something much more than a Maratha leader. When his term of imprisonment was over, though he was past middle age and had lived a turbulent life, he resumed many of his former activities. He found a new and powerful ally in Mrs. Annie Besant, and in 1915 formed a Home Rule League. In 1916, he attended for the first time for 10 years the annual session of the Congress held at Lucknow. The tone of that session, in the course of which the moderates and the extremists joined in demanding from the British an announcement that it is the aim and intention of British policy to confer self government on India at an early date, was the predominant cause of the introduction of the reforms embodied in the Government of India Act of 1919. The prestige of Congress was immensely strengthened by the return of Tilak. It is at least possible that if there had been no reconciliation, the British government might have ignored its demands, or that the demands would not have been made. After the armistice, Tilak took a leading part in demanding that India should be represented on terms of equality with the other dominions at the peace conference, and in anticipation of this, he was chosen by Congress, together with Mr. Gandhi and Syed Hassan Imam, as a delegate thereto. When the British government refused to grant him a passport, he wrote to M. Clemenceau, Premier of France and President of the Peace Conference, claiming that with her, India's vast area, enormous resources, and prodigious population, she may well aspire to be a leading power in Asia, if not in the world. She could therefore be a powerful steward of the League of Nations in the East for maintaining the peace of the world and the stability of the British Empire against all aggressors and disturbers of peace, whether in Asia or elsewhere. India. Tilak would in fact maintain, as at this time did Gandhi, aspired to freedom, but freedom as a partner in the British Empire. In 1919, Tilak did visit England as the leading member of a deputation sent by Congress to put its point of view with regard to the new Government of India Act. Tilak appeared before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament and was active in reorganizing the British Committee of the Congress so that it could more effectively put the Congress point of view before the British public. He became involved in a libel action against Sir Valentine Chitrul, who had, after Tilak's imprisonment in 1908, published some severe structures on him in the Times, which were reprinted in book form. It was after losing this action that he returned to India. He was still a force in Indian political life. Though events had moved far from the days of the Kesari, he himself had broadened and mellowed in outlook. By taking a leading part in bringing about the Lucknow Pact with the Muslim League in 1916, he had shown that he no longer classed Muslims as foreigners. And he incited his followers no more to violence. But though a force, he was no longer the chief force. In Indian nationalism, his mantle as a popular leader rested on the shoulders of Mahatma Gandhi. At the Amritsar Congress in 1919, which both attended, it was to Gandhi that members looked for leadership. In 1920, Congress adopted Gandhi's plan of non-violent non-cooperation. August day fixed for the putting into practice of the new principle of Satyagraha, a principle so alien to the temperament of at least the Tilak of earlier years. On that same day, the day on which Gandhi arrived in the city, Tilak died in Bombay. A vast crowd, which included Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, followed the final funeral procession. It is frankly difficult for an Englishman to form a just estimate of the measure of Tilak's greatness, though in his later years he grew more moderate. He had, through all the most active years of his life, been ruthless in his hatred of British rule, and it is not easy for a member of that race to condone the acts of terrorism in the Deccan and Bengal which he did so much to inspire. Yet, that there were elements of real greatness in his character is not to be denied. He was, in fact, much more than a politician. He was a leader. Many aspects of his leadership were deplored not only by the British but also by many of his fellow Indians, who were just as disinterested as he in the service of their country. But this salient fact remains: more than any man of his generation, he was the cause of the great reawakening of self respect and self confidence that came to India in the years before the war, and in his later years, he was a powerful factor in the creation of an all India opinion. It must be held greatly to Tilak's credit that he, who in the 19th century could do his utmost to inflame Hindu opinion against the Muslims, should be a prime mover in effecting the considerable step forward towards Hindu Muslim unity marked by the Lucknow Pact. After his death, his great successor in the public esteem, Mahatma Gandhi, strove ceaselessly to the same end. Between the methods used by these two men to establish a free India, there is a wide gulf fixed. To Gandhi, the use of bullet, dagger, or bomb is anathema, yet this they have in common. To both was accorded by millions in India a hero worship, which is only given to those who, according to their lights, are doing their utmost to ensure the greatness of their country.